I just went to say hi to Violet, who is streaming right now, and I come back and I have my goal almost complete. On the one thing it says it's only 49, but on the other it says it's 50. It's unclear. But yay! Thank you. Okay. Let's get into the reading. So, I have stacked up right now The Little Thumb. And I'm excited to read that one for you. I have no idea what it is really, but that's what we do here. Alright. Yeah, you're probably right. I'll do that real quick. Let's see if that fixes it. Yes. Yes, it's happy now. I will change the goal again. I always just do the automatic, the next 10, you know? But thank you very much for helping me with the 50. Okay. The Little Thumb. Once upon a time. Oh no. Oh no. We're gonna put a harsh stop because literally two more words and I'd be running into a... Obviously, the meaning is different in this story, but it is a not okay word. I'm going to Google what it would have meant back then. It is an F word, but this version is spelled with only one G. And if that does not clarify, I don't know what to tell you. I don't want to say it, because sort of I am one. No, not that. What is this version? I guess someone that makes a bundle of sticks. Someone that binds something together is what they're trying to tell me. Jeez. I don't like this. Yeah, it is that word. Okay. It's a pieces of wood bundle maker. Yeah. Normally I might stumble into things and say it with more gusto, knowing that it does not mean the same thing at all. But since I am also still new and don't want people thinking that I'm just here to be like, oh yeah, I'll just... No. Also, I kind of am one, so I know I don't particularly want to say it and have the incorrect connotations with it. The Simpsons. I guess they're very, oh, my brain lost the word. Educational at times. That's it. Oh. Well, I didn't know that this was the alternative meaning. Okay, we'll go back to the little thumb. And if I say bundle maker, that will be enough. And if it comes up again, then I may rage quit this story. But anyway. Oh, olden times and how things have changed. Which reminds me that no, but not in this sense. It is the full word instead of the shortened word, which is the European cigarette meaning. This is the longer word, and then dash maker, which is to mean bundle maker. Anyway, I'm seeing it a few more times. It's going to be here a lot. I'll just say bundle maker every time it's in that context, so I think that'll be fine. And then, I mean, I've enjoyed all of and everyone was gay, and they gaily did this and all that. I like that. That one's fun, because I can impose that Everyone's happy that they're quite queer, and I love it. But this one, it has a bit harsher of a meaning if you speak the syllables, so I don't want to do that just yet while I'm still new and people could misunderstand me. All right. A long, rambling way to get around the story. Now you know, you can snicker to yourself, those that are here at the start. When I say bundle maker, or if it's alone, I'll say bundle. That's what that means. That's what they're trying to say. But they're saying it in the old-timey, harsh way. Anyway. Once upon a time, there was a bundle maker and his wife who had 7 children, all boys. Okay, but whose job is it to make bundles? That sounds really very niche. And how do you support 7 children with that? Okay, anyway. The eldest was but yet 10 years old, and the youngest only 7. Oh, there's only 3 years. Was it a bunch of twins and triplets? What? How? The math is not mathing. Oh my gosh, okay. They were very poor, yes, they were very poor. And their 7 children were a great source of trouble to them because not one of them was able to earn his bread. What gave them yet more uneasiness was that the youngest was very delicate and scarce ever spoke a word, which made people take for stupidity that was a sign of good sense. He was very little, and when born he was no bigger than one's thumb. Hence he was called Little Thumb. The poor child was the drudge of the household, and was always in the wrong. He was, however, the most bright and discreet of all the brothers, and if he spoke little, he heard and thought the more. There came a very bad year, and the famine was so great that these poor people resolved to rid themselves of their children. One evening, when they were in bed, and the bundle maker was sitting with his wife at the fire, he said to her, with his heart ready to burst with grief, "You see plainly that we no longer can give our children food, and I cannot bear to see them die of hunger before my eyes. I am resolved to lose them in the wood tomorrow, which may very easily be done, for while they amuse themselves in tying up bundles, we have only to run away and leave them without their seeing us." So they're going to pull on Hansel and Gretel. Okay. "Ah," cried his wife, "could you really take the children and lose them?" In vain did her husband represent to her their great poverty. She would not consent to it. She was poor, but she was their mother. Hello. Frigid meat wad, that is certainly a name. However, having consented, what a grief it would be to her to see them die of hunger, she consented and went weeping to bed. Glad you can laugh at your name. Little Thumb heard all they had said, again just like Hansel and Gretel. For hearing that they were talking business, he got up softly and slipped under his father's seat, so as to hear without being seen. He went to bed again, but did not sleep a wink all the rest of the night, thinking of what he had to do. He got up early in the morning. Thank you. He got up early in the morning and went to the brookside, where he filled his pockets full of small white pebbles and then returned home. They all went out, but Little Thumb never told his brothers a word of what he knew. Again, exactly like Hansel and Gretel, so spoilers. This is going quite similarly to how the Hansel and Gretel story was going earlier today. Except in this case, there's no little girl, and instead of the one little girl, there are 6 other boys, and somehow this Little Thumb is, as small as a thumb, or he was at least, and is going to do all this. Oh my gosh, okay. They went into a very thick forest, where they could not see one another at 10 paces apart. The bundle maker began to cut wood, and the children to gather up sticks to make the bundles. I still might end up rage quitting. It is like every other paragraph. Their father and mother, having seen them busy at their work, got away from them unbeknown, and then all at once ran as fast as they could through a winding bypath. When the children found they were alone, they began to cry with all their might. Little Thumb let them cry on, knowing very well how to get home again, for as he came, he had dropped the little white pebbles he had in his pockets all along the way. Then he said to them, "Do not be afraid, my brothers. Father and mother have left us here, but I will lead you home again. Only follow me." They followed, and he brought them home by the very same way they had come into the forest. They dared not go in at first, but stood outside the door to listen to what their father and mother were saying. The very moment the bundle maker and his wife reached home, the lord of the manor sent them 10 crowns, which he had long owed them, and which they never hoped to see. This gave them new life, for the poor people were dying of hunger. The bundle maker sent his wife to the butcher's at once, as it was a long while since they had eaten. She bought thrice as much as meat as was needed for supper for 2 people. When they had eaten, the woman said, "Alas, where are our poor children now? They would make a good feast of what we have left here. It was you, William, who wished to lose them. I told you we should repent of it. What are they now doing in the forest? Alas, perhaps the wolves have already eaten them up. You are very inhuman thus to have lost your children." Now that we know his name is William, I'm just going to call him William and forget his very, honestly, stupid profession. William grew at last out of patience, for she repeated 20 times that he would repent of it, and that she was in the right. He threatened to beat her if she did not hold her tongue. William was, perhaps, more sorry than his wife, but she teased him so he could not endure it. She wept bitterly, saying, "Alas, where are my children now, my poor children?" She said this once so very loud that the children, who were at the door, heard her and cried out all together, "Here we are! Here we are!" She immediately ran to let them in, and said as she embraced them, "How happy I am to see you again, my dear children. You are very tired and very hungry, and my poor Peter, you are covered with mud. Come in and let me clean you." Peter was her eldest son, whom she loved more than all the rest. Okay, wow. Because he was red-haired, and she was herself. Oh, so it's a ginger thing. Okay. What? They sat down to table and ate with an appetite which pleased both father and mother, to whom they told how frightened they were in the forest, nearly all speaking at once. The good folk were delighted to see their children once more. "Thank you! Oh, hello, Violet. What are you doing over here? Get back to your own stream, you little..." But I don't know if you heard, we have this story that is very similar to Hansel and Gretel, just while you're here, quickly. And these 7 boys come back. There's a whole complicated thing about a bad thing to say and whatever, but I'm laughing at the mother is like, "Oh, I'm so glad that you're not dead, my eldest son Peter." And the story says who she liked the most, because he was red-haired and so was she. It's literally just a little ginger cult of preference. I can't imagine. But alright, now go back to your own stream if you haven't yet. Okay. They sat down to the table and ate with an appetite which pleased both father and mother, to whom they told how frightened they were, all speaking at once. The good folk were delighted to see their children once more, and this joy continued while the 10 crowns lasted. But when the money was all spent, they fell again into their former uneasiness, and resolved to lose their children again. and that they might be the surer of doing it, they determined to take them much farther than before. Again, very exactly like Hansel and Gretel. They could not talk of this so secretly, but they were overheard by Little Thumb, who laid his plans to get out of the difficulty as he had done before. But though he got up very early to go and pick some pebbles, he could not, for he found the house door double locked. He did not know what to do. Exactly what happened to Hansel. Jeez. Their father had given each of them a piece of bread for their breakfast. He reflected that he might make use of the bread instead of the pebbles by throwing crumbs all along the way they should pass, and so he stuffed it in his pocket. Their father and mother led them into the thickest and most obscure part of the forest, and then, stealing away into a bypath, left them there. Little Thumb was not very much worried about it, for he thought he could easily find the way again by means of his bread, which he had scattered all along as he came. But he was very much surprised when he could not find a single crumb. The birds had come and eaten them all. They were now in great trouble, for the more they wandered, the deeper they went into the forest. Night now fell, and there arose a high wind, which filled them with fear. They fancied they heard on every side the howling of wolves coming to devour them. They scarce dared to ask or turn their heads. Then it rained very hard, which wetted them to the skin. Their feet slipped at every step, and they fell into the mud, covering their hands with it, so that they knew not what to do with them. Little Thumb climbed up to the top of a tree to see if he could discover anything. Looking on every side, he saw at last a glimmering light, like that of a candle, but a long way beyond the forest. He came down, and when upon the ground he could see it no more, which grieved him sadly. However, having walked for some time with his brothers toward that side on which he had seen the light, he discovered it again as he came out of the wood. They arrived at last at a house where this candle was, not without many frights, for very often they lost sight of it, which happened every time they came into a hollow. They knocked at the door, and a good woman came and opened it. She asked them what they wanted. Little Thumb told her they were poor children who were lost in the forest, and desired to lodge there for charity's sake. The woman, seeing them all so very pretty, began to weep, and said to them, "Alas, poor babies, where do you come from? Do you know that this house belongs to a cruel ogre who eats little children?" "Alas, dear madam," answered Little Thumb, who with his brothers was trembling in every limb. "What shall we do? The wolves of the forest surely will devour us tonight if you refuse us shelter in your house, and so we would rather the gentleman should eat us. Perhaps he may take pity on us, if you will be pleased to ask him to do so." The ogre's wife, who believed she could hide them from her husband till morning, let them come in, and took them to warm themselves at a very good fire, for there was a whole sheep roasting for the ogre's supper. As they began to warm themselves, they heard 3 or 4 great raps at the door. This was the ogre who was come home. His wife quickly hid them under the bed, and went to open the door. The ogre at once asked if supper was ready, and the wine drawn, and then sat himself down to table. The sheep was as yet all raw, but he liked it better for that. He sniffed about right to the left and to the right, saying, "I smell fresh meat." "What you smell," said his wife, "must be the calf which I have just now killed and flayed." "I smell fresh meat, I tell you once more," replied the ogre, looking crossly at his wife, "and there is something here which I do not understand." As he spoke these words, he got up from the table and went straight to the bed. "Ah," said he, "that is how you would cheat me. I know not why I do not eat you, too. It is well for you that you are tough. Here is game which comes very luckily to entertain 3 ogres of my acquaintance, who are to pay me a visit in a day or 2. He dragged them out from under the bed one by one. The poor children fell upon their knees and begged his pardon, but they had to do with one of the most cruel of ogres, who, far from having pity on them, was already devouring them in his mind, and told his wife they would be delicate eating when she had made a good sauce. He then took a great knife, and coming up to these poor children, sharpened it upon a great whetstone which he held in his left hand. He had already taken hold of one of them when his wife said to him, "What need you do it now? Will you not have time enough tomorrow?" "Hold your prating," said the ogre. "They will eat the tenderer." "But you have so much meat already," replied his wife. "Here a calf, 2 sheep, and a pig." The good woman— "Oh, no, that is true," said the ogre. "Give them a good supper that they may not grow thin, and put them to bed." The good woman was overjoyed at this, and gave them a good supper, but they were so much afraid that they could not eat. As for the ogre, he sat down again to drink, being highly pleased that he had the wherewithal to treat his friends. He drank 12 glasses more than ordinary, which got up to his head and obliged him to go to bed. The ogre had 7 daughters, who were still little children. These young ogresses had all of them very fine complexions, but they all had little grey eyes, quite round, hooked noses, a very large mouth, and very long, sharp teeth, set far apart. They were not as yet wicked, but they promised well to be, for they had already bitten little children. They had been put to bed early, all 7 in one bed, with every one a crown of gold upon her head. There was in the same chamber a bed of the like size, and the ogre's wife put the 7 little boys into this bed, after which she went to bed herself. Little Thumb, who had observed that the ogre's daughters had crowns of gold upon their heads, and was afraid lest the ogre should repent his not killing them that evening, got up at midnight, and taking his brother's bonnets and his own, went very softly and put them upon the heads of the 7 ogresses. After having taken off their crowns of gold, which he put upon his own head and his brother's, so that the ogre might take them for his daughters, and his daughters for the little boys he wanted to kill. Things turned out just as he had thought, for the ogre, waking about midnight, regretted that he had deferred till morning to do that which he might have done overnight, and jumped quickly out of bed, taking his great knife. "Let us see," said he, "how our little rogues do, and do not make 2 jobs of the matter." He then went up, groping all the way into his daughter's chamber, and coming to the bed where the little boys lay, and who were all fast asleep except Little Thumb, who was terribly afraid when he found the ogre fumbling about his head, as he had done about his brothers. He felt the golden crowns and said, "I should have made a fine piece of work of it, truly. It is clear I drank too much last night." Then he went to the bed where the girls lay, and having found the little boys' bonnets, "Ah," said he, "my merry lads, are you there? Let us work boldly." And saying these words, without more ado, he cruelly murdered all his 7 daughters. Well pleased with what he had done, he went to bed again. So soon as Little Thumb heard the ogre snore, he waked his brothers, and bade them put on their clothes quickly and follow him. They stole softly into the garden and got over the wall. They ran about all night, trembling all the while, without knowing which way they went. The ogre, when he woke, said to his wife, "Go upstairs and dress those young rascals who came here last night." The ogress was very much surprised of this goodness. Yeah, I don't know what they ought to have done exactly. Sorry, just seeing those comments, but yeah. Could they not have left before? Like, he took the crowns and things, but anyway. Go upstairs and dress them. The ogress was very much surprised at this goodness of her husband, not dreaming after what manner she should dress them, but thinking that he had ordered her to go up and put on their clothes, she went, and was horrified when she perceived her 7 daughters all dead. She began by fainting away, as was only natural in such a case. The ogre, fearing his wife was too long in doing what he had ordered, went up to help her. He was no less amazed than his wife at the frightful spectacle. "Ah, what have I done?" cried he. "The wretches shall pay for it, and that instantly." He threw a pitcher of water upon his wife's face, and having brought her to herself, "Give me quickly," cried he, "my 7-leagued boots, that I may go and catch them." He went out into the country, and after running in all directions, he came at last into the very road where the poor children were, and not above 100 paces from their father's house. They espied the ogre, who went at one step from mountain to mountain, and over rivers as easily as the narrowest brooks. Little Thumb, seeing a hollow rock near the place where they were, hid his brothers in it, and crowded into it himself, watching what would become of the ogre. The ogre, who found himself tired with his long and fruitless journey, for these boots of 7 leagues greatly taxed the wearer, had a great mind to rest himself, and by chance went to sit down upon the rock in which the little boys had hidden themselves. As he was worn out with fatigue, he fell asleep, and after reposing himself some time, began to snore so frightfully that the poor children were no less afraid of him than when he held up his great knife and was going to take their lives. Little Thumb was not so much frightened as his brothers, and told them that they should run away at once toward home while the ogre was asleep so soundly, and that they need not be in any trouble about him. They took his advice and got home quickly. Little Thumb then went close to the ogre, pulled off his boots gently, and put them on his own legs. The boots were very long and large, but as they were fairy boots, they had the gift of becoming big or little, according to the legs of those who wore them, so that they fitted his feet and legs as well as if they had been made for them, as if they had been made for him. He went straight to the ogre's house, where he saw his wife crying bitterly for the loss of her murdered daughters. "Your husband," said Little Thumb, "is in very great danger, for he has been taken by a gang of thieves, who have sworn to kill him if he does not give them all his gold and silver. At the very moment they held their daggers at his throat, he perceived me and begged me to come and tell you the condition he was in, and to say that you should give me all he has of value, without retaining any one thing, for otherwise they will kill him without mercy. As his case is very pressing, he desired me to make use of his 7-leagued boots, which you can see I have on, so that I might make the more haste, and that I might show you that I do not impose upon you." The good woman, being greatly frightened, gave him all she had, for this ogre was a very good husband, though he ate up little children. Little Thumb, having thus got all the ogre's money, came home to his father's house, where he was received with abundance of joy. There are many people who do not agree in regard to this act of Little Thumb's, and pretend that he never robbed the ogre at all, and that he only thought he might very justly take off his 7-leagued boots, because he made no other use of them but to run after little children. These folks affirm that they are very well assured of this, because they have drunk and eaten often at the bundle maker's house. They declare that when Little Thumb had taken off the ogre's boots, he went to court, where he was informed that they were very much in trouble about a certain army, which was 200 leagues off, and anxious as to the success of battle. He went, they say, to the king, and told him that if he desired it, he would bring him news from the army before night. The king promised him a great sum of money if he succeeded. Little Thumb returned that very same night with the news, and, this first expedition causing him to be known, he earned as much as he wished, for the king paid him very well for carrying his orders to the army. Many ladies employed him also to carry messages, from which he made much money. After having for some time carried on the business of a messenger and gained thereby great wealth, he went home to his father, and it is impossible to express the joy of his family. He placed them all in comfortable circumstances, brought places for his father and brothers, and by that means settled them very handsomely in the world, while he successfully continued to make his own way. The end. So it has a little coda at the end that said, if you don't like that ending, here's this other one. If you don't like the robbery bit, well, here's an alternative. Alright, fair enough. I kind of like being the thief more than the, oh, I'll just go work for the king version. Mostly because they said people don't like it, and so they say this, as opposed to, so this is what really happened. Very odd. But either way, just another wacky one of these stories. And at least it did shift from the Hansel and Gretel story long enough to be ogre-oriented. I thought it was going to follow that premise all the way to the end. But alright, that was Little Thumb. And if you have trigger requests, please drop them in the chat. Or if you'd like for me to continue on to the next story, I will do that. The next story will be The Golden Goose. It's a bit shorter than our last one. But either way is good with me, so I'll give you a couple of moments to put requests in. Oh, the trigger choices are on the screen. If they're not very legible, I've been trying to set time to pick out something else, but humming, page ruffling, brushing, comb, twing, a beaded bracelet, tin in a plastic jar, mouth pops, sticks rustling, knife sharpening, keys that people have said sound more like a little wind chime, dice, singing frog, scissor snips or taps on a glass jar. Humming is a classic. Alright. Oh. Okay. No scissors. Scissors then. And maybe then humming. Alright. What does that mean? What does it mean to cut your ear? And I wouldn't know if Violet does the same thing, but does that mean I should hold it away further? No, of course. Well then, of course not. has been scissors. Now I'll move to the humming. Alright, if there's any other trigger requests, say them now because I'm about to move to the next story. Thank you for the little cozy emotes. Everyone's cozy, that's good. Okay. The next story is The Golden Goose. I read and, oh, alright. Good night. Sleep well. Nice to meet you too. I read an unhinged other Goose story, but thankfully this is not that. I sure hope it's not the same story with just a little twist. Oh yes, already it is seemingly different. The Golden Goose. Alright. There was a man who had 3 sons, the youngest of whom was called Dummling, and was despised, mocked, and sneered at on every occasion. It happened that the eldest wanted to go into the forest to hew wood, and before he went his mother gave him a beautiful sweet cake and a bottle of wine in order that he might not suffer from hunger or thirst. When he entered the forest he met a little gray-haired old woman who bade him good day and said, "Do you give me a piece of cake out of your pocket, and let me have a draught of your wine? I am so hungry and thirsty. But the clever son answered, If I give you my cake and wine, I shall have none for myself. Be off with you. And he left the little man standing and went on. But when he came to hew down his tree, it was not long before he made a false stroke, and the axe cut him in the arm, so that he had to go home and have it bound up. And this was the little gray man's doing. After this, the second son went into the forest, and his mother gave him, like the eldest, a cake and a bottle of wine. The little old gray man met him likewise, and asked him for a piece of cake and a drink of wine. But the second son, too, said sensibly enough, What I give you will be taken away from myself. Be off. And he left the little man standing and went on. His punishment, however, was not delayed. When he had made a few blows at the tree, he struck himself in the leg, so that he had to be carried home. Then Drumling said, Father, do let me go and cut wood. The father answered, Your brothers have hurt themselves with it. Leave it alone. You do not understand anything about it. But Dummling begged so long that at last he said, Just go then. You will get wiser by hurting yourself. His mother gave him a cake made with water and baked it in the cinders, and with it a bottle of sour beer. When he came to the forest, the little old gray man met him likewise, and greeting him, said, Give me a piece of your cake and a drink out of your bottle. I am so hungry and thirsty. Dummling answered, I have only cinder cake. Oh, misread. Mother gave him a cake with water and baked in the cinders. So he says, I have only cinder cake and sour beer. If that pleases you, we will sit down and eat. So they sat down, and Dummling pulled out his cinder cake. It was a fine sweet cake, and the sour beer had become good wine. So they ate and drank, and after that the little man said, Since you have a good heart, and are willing to divide what you have, I will give you good luck. There stands an old tree. Cut it down, and you will find something at the roots. Then the little man took leave of him. Dummling went and cut down the tree, and when it fell, there was a goose sitting in the roots with feathers of pure gold. He lifted her up, and taking her with him, went to an inn where he thought he might stay the night. Now the host had 3 daughters, who saw the goose and were curious to know what such a wonderful bird might be, and would have liked to have one of its own golden feathers. The eldest thought, I shall soon find an opportunity of pulling out a feather, and as soon as Dummling had gone out, she seized the goose by the wing, but her finger and hand remained sticking fast to it. The second came soon afterwards, thinking only of how she might get a feather for herself, but she had scarcely touched her sister than she was held fast. At last the third also came with the like intent, and the others screamed out, Keep away! For goodness' sake, keep away! But she did not understand why she was to keep away. The others are there, she thought, I might as well be there too, and ran to them. But as soon as she had touched her sister, she remained sticking fast to her, so they had to spend the night with the goose. The next morning, Dummling took the goose under his arm and set out, without troubling himself about the 3 girls who were hanging on to it. Okay. Oh yeah, these girls are just like following along, I guess. I don't know. I won't even talk to them. It's fine. What? They were obliged to run after him continually, now left, now right, wherever his legs took him. In the middle of the fields, the parson met them, and when they saw the procession, he said, For shame, you good-for-nothing girls, why are you running across the fields after this young man? Is that seemly? At the same time, he seized the youngest by the hand in order to pull her away, but as soon as he touched her, he likewise was stuck fast, and was himself obliged to run behind. Before long, the sexton came, and saw that his master, the parson, running behind 3 girls. He was astonished at this, and called out, "Hi, your reverence. Whither away so quickly? Do not forget that we have a christening today." And running after him, he took him by the sleeve, but was also held fast to it. Whilst the 5 were trotting thus one behind the other, 2 labourers came along with their hoes from the fields. The parson called out to them and begged them that they would set him and the sexton free, but they had scarcely touched the sexton when they were held fast, and now there were 7 of them running behind Dummling and the goose. Soon afterwards he came to a city where a king ruled, who had a daughter who was so serious that no one could make her laugh. So he put forth a decree that whosoever should be able to make her laugh should marry her. When Dummling heard this, he went with his goose and all her train before the king's daughter, and as soon as she saw the 7 people running on, one behind the other, she began to laugh quite loudly, and as if she would never stop. Thereupon Dummling asked to have her for his wife, but the king did not like the son-in-law, and made all manner of excuses, and said he must first produce a man who could drink a cellar full of wine. Dummling thought of the little grey man, who could certainly help him, so he went into the forest, and in the same place where he had felled the tree, he saw a man sitting, who had a very sorrowful face. Dummling asked him what he was taking to heart so sorely, and he answered, "I have such a great thirst and cannot quench it. Cold water I cannot stand. A barrel of wine I have just emptied, but that to me is like a drop on a hot stone." "There I can help you," said Dummling. "Just come with me, and you shall be satisfied." He led him into the king's cellar, and the man bent over the huge barrels and drank till his loins hurt, and before the day was out he had emptied all the barrels. Then Dummling asked once more for his bride, but the king was vexed that such an ugly fellow, whom everyone called Dummling, should take away his daughter, and he made a new condition. He must first find a man who could eat a whole mountain of bread. Dummling did not think long, but went straight into the forest, where in the same place there sat a man who was tying up his body with a strap, and making an awful face, saying, "I have eaten a whole oven full of rolls, but what good is that when one has such hunger as I? My stomach remains empty, and I must tie myself up if I am not to die of hunger." At this Dummling was glad and said, "Get up and come with me, you shall eat yourself full." He led him to the king's palace, where all the flour in the whole kingdom was collected, and from it he caused a huge mountain of bread to be baked. The man from the forest stood before it, began to eat, and by the end of the day the whole mountain had vanished. Then Dummling for the 3rd time asked for his bride, but the king again sought a way out, and ordered a ship which could sail on land and on water. "As soon as you come sailing back in it," said he, "you shall have my daughter for a wife." Dummling went straight into the forest, and there sat the little grey man to whom he had given his cake. When he heard what Dummling wanted, he said, "Since you have given me to eat and to drink, I will give you the ship, and I do all this because you were once kind to me." Then he gave him the ship that could sail on land and water, and when the king saw that, he could no longer prevent him from having his daughter. The wedding was celebrated, and after the king's death, Dummling inherited his kingdom and lived for a long time contentedly with his wife. The end. Well, good for Dummling. Good for you, dude. Everybody else can be all complicated and ridiculous. But what happened to all of the people stuck to the goose? What happens then? Do any of them get to be free? I was waiting for, and when the princess laughed, everyone was set free. And then Dummling said, "What are you doing? Let go of my goose." And then he went. Don't worry about it. Yeah, I don't know what I'm doing bringing reason into these stories. There's no reasoning in this. Everything is wonky. It is whatever the probably high on bread mold people wanted. Well, trigger requests, or I will jump into more stories. I have read through the first section of this website. Well, the first section of this section. There's actually so many stories here. The next stuff I will be doing is going into a couple of the separate books and things. Knife. That's not a knife. I will do knife sharpening then. Let us rearrange ourselves. Hold on. Oh, you didn't hear me because I was muted while I was setting up, but, yes, little Psyduck, that is the knife. Step 1. I may soon have to take the knife sharpening off for the fact that I may be getting my knives too sharp. Considering I have not used them hardly at all since doing the sharpening on stream. Or I'll have to get other knives. I'll figure it out. Alright. Any other triggers? I will pick one then. I will do the singing frog, but I will adjust sounds because my frog is a big boy and he is loud. Alright, that was the big old chunkin' boy. It's a fat frog. And I will do one more, and if no one else says anything, I will pick one myself And then we will move on to the next story. I believe the next story is going to be... Well, I either have something called Riquet with the Tuft, or Riquet with the Tuft, or a variation on Sleeping Beauty. I read Sleeping Beauty before, but this is a different version on the same site. So, whoever is here, pop into the chat with what you would like to hear, which story, if there's a trigger. Always let me know. You can keep thinking about which story. I'm going to do glass jar taps, and then I'll do the next story. Alright, it has been decided. Sleeping Beauty it shall be. When I quickly scanned it, it looked like it was just a little bit different from the other one, but not much. This one is specifically called Sleeping Beauty in the Woods. So that's where it's different, I suppose. I don't know why. Oh wait. That's what that should say. But thank you, Death Noah, for being very responsive in the chat. Makes me feel like I'm maybe a little less insane than I am. It's nice. And here we go. Once upon a time, I don't know why, Psyduck dabbing is just... That's gold. I need these Psyduck emotes. I do. All the rest are great, but the dabbing just... It didn't need to go so hard. Alright. Once upon a time, there was a king and a queen who were very sorry they had no children, so sorry that it cannot be told. At last, however, the queen had a daughter. There was a fine christening, and the princess had for her grandmothers all the fairies they could find in the whole kingdom. There were were 7 of them, so that every one of them might confer a gift upon her, as was the custom of fairies in those days. By this means... Oh, what is this? I have no idea what that means. Where did it go? What happened? What happened? What was that? What is this? I must investigate. Is this someone I should follow? I have turned off my sound. I will investigate this further at another time. But okay. I will maybe need to ask Violet what that does. When I have time, go watch them. Okay. I will do that. Oh, that gives me the emotes. Bless you. Oh my goodness, yay. I will cherish them. Do I have them now? I have them. This should not make me so excited, but now whenever there is a deeply concerning moment in these stories, I can just drop concern, murder Psyduck, and it is perfect. Yay, thank you, Death Noah. Alright. Sleeping Beauty, serious-ish, I don't know. Okay, so the fairies gift things upon her, and by this means the princess had all the perfections imaginable. After the christening was over, the company returned to the king's palace, where was prepared a great feast for the fairies. There was placed before every one of them a magnificent cover with a case of massive gold, wherein were a spoon and a knife and a fork, all of pure gold, set with diamonds and rubies. But as they were all sitting down at a table, they saw a very old fairy come into the hall. She had not been invited, because for more than 50 years she had not been out of a certain tower, and she was believed to be either dead or enchanted. Already a bit different, because the other Sleeping Beauty, they only had enough plates, so that they only invited enough fairies as they had plates for. So this one, I mean, the king and whoever invited the fairies really had no, they didn't know better. It's not their fault. Anyway, the king ordered her a cover, but he could not give her a case of gold as the others had, because 7 only had made for the 7 fairies. 7 had only been made for the 7 fairies. The old fairy fancied she was slighted, and muttered threats between her teeth. But you showed up, and they didn't know you were alive. This is different. Calm down, lady. One of the young fairies who sat near heard her, and judging that she might give the little princess some unlucky gift, hid herself behind the curtains as soon as they left the table. She hoped that she might speak last, and undo as much as she could the evil which the old fairy might do. In the meanwhile, all the fairies began to give their gifts to the princess. The youngest gave her for her gift that she should be the most beautiful person in the world. The next, that she should have the wit of an angel. The third, that she should be able to do everything she did gracefully. The fourth, that she should dance perfectly. The fifth, that she should sing like a nightingale. And the sixth, that she should play all kinds of musical instruments to the fullest perfection. The old fairy's turn coming next, her head shaking more with spite than with age, she said that the princess should pierce her hand with a spindle and die of the wound. This terrible gift made the whole company tremble, and everybody fell a-crying. what a wonderful way to turn that phrase. Fell a-crying, crying. At this very instant, the young fairy came from behind the curtains and said these words in a loud voice. Assure yourselves, O king and queen, that your daughter shall not die of this disaster. It is true I have no power to undo entirely what my elder has done, but the princess shall indeed pierce her hand with a spindle, but instead of dying, she shall only fall into a deep sleep, which shall last 100 years, at the end of which a king's son shall come and awake her. The king, to avoid the misfortune foretold by the old fairy, issued orders forbidding anyone, on pain of death, to spin with a distaff and spindle, or to have a spindle in his house. About 15 or 16 years later, the king and queen being absent at one of their country villas, the young princess was one day running up and down the palace. She went from room to room, and at last she came to a little garret on the top of the tower, where a good old woman alone was spinning with her spindle. This good woman had never heard of the king's orders against spindles. So in this version, everybody is not trying to be malicious. They're just bad communicators. Anyway, what are you doing there, my good woman? Said the princess. I am spinning, my pretty child, said the woman, who did not know who the princess was. Ha, said the princess. This is very pretty. How do you do it? Give it to me. Let me see if I can do it. She had no sooner taken it into her hand than, either because she was too quick and heedless, or because the decree of the fairy had so ordained, it ran into her hand, and she fell down in a swoon. The old woman, not knowing what to do, cried out for help. People came in from every quarter. They threw water upon the face of the princess, unlaced her, stuck her on the palms of her hands, and rubbed her temples with cologne water, but nothing would bring her to herself. Then the king, who came up at hearing the noise, remembered what the fairies had foretold. He knew very well that this must come to pass, since the fairies had foretold it, and he caused the princess to be carried into the finest room in the palace, and to be laid upon a bed all embroidered with gold and silver. One would have taken her for a little angel, she was so beautiful, for her swooning had not dimmed the brightness of her complexion. Her cheeks were carnation, and her lips coral. It is true her eyes were shut, but she was heard to breathe softly, which satisfied those about her that she was not dead. The king gave orders that they should let her sleep quietly till the time came for her to awake. The good fairy, who had saved her life by condemning her to sleep 100 years, was in the kingdom of Matakin, 12,000 leagues off, when this accident befell the princess, but she was instantly informed of it by a little dwarf, who had 7-leagued boots, that is, boots with which he could stride over 7 leagues of ground at once. The fairy started off at once and arrived about an hour later in a fiery chariot drawn by dragons. Good for her. The king handed her out of the chariot, and she approved everything he had done, but as he had very great foresight, she thought that when the princess should wake, she might not know what to do with herself, as if she was all alone in this old palace. This was what she did. She touched with her wand everything in the palace, except the king and queen, governesses, maids of honor, ladies of the bedchamber, gentlemen, officers, stewards, cooks, undercooks, kitchen maids, guards with their porters, pages, and footmen. She likewise touched all the horses which were in the stables, the cart horses, the hunters, and the saddle horses, the grooms, the great dogs in the outward court, and little Mopsy, too, the princess's spaniel, which was lying on the bed. As soon as she touched them, they fell asleep, not to awake again until their mistress did, that they might be ready to wait upon her when she wanted them. Okay, but not the king and queen. The very spits of the fire, as full as they could hold of partridges and pheasants, fell asleep, and the fire itself as well. All this was done in a moment. The fairies are not long in doing their work. And now the king and queen, having kissed their dear child without waking her, went out of the palace and set forth orders that nobody should come near it. These orders were not necessary, for in a quarter of an hour's time there grew up all around about the park such a vast number of trees, great and small, bushes and brambles, twining one within another, that neither man nor beast could pass through, so that nothing could be seen but the very top of the towers of the palace, and that too only from far off. Everyone knew that this was also the work of the fairy, in order that while the princess slept she should have nothing to fear from curious people. After 100 years, the son of the king then reigning, who was of another family from that of the sleeping princess— oh good, we're confirming that they are not related, we appreciate this— was a-hunting on that side of the country, and he asked what those towers were, which he saw in the middle of a great thick wood. Everyone answered according as they had heard. Some said that it was an old haunted castle, others that all the witches of the country held their midnight revels there, but the common opinion was that it was an ogre's dwelling, and that he carried it all to the little children he could catch, so as to eat them up at his leisure, without anyone being able to follow him, for he alone had the power to make his way through the wood. Interesting theory. Yes, thanks for that. The prince did not know what to believe, and presently a very aged countryman spake to him thus: "May it please your royal highness, more than 50 years since I heard from my father that there was then in this castle the most beautiful princess that was ever seen, that she must sleep there 100 years, and that she should be waked by a king's son, for whom she was reserved." The young prince, on hearing this, was all on fire. He thought, without weighing the matter, that he could put an end to this rare adventure, and pushed on by love and the desire of glory, resolved at once to look into it. As soon as he began to get near the wood, all the great trees, the bushes and brambles gave way of themselves to let him pass through. He walked up to the castle, which he saw at the end of a large avenue, and you can imagine he was a good deal surprised when he saw none of his people following him, because the trees closed again as soon as he had passed through them. However, he did not cease from continuing this way. A young prince in search of glory is ever valiant. He came into a spacious outer court, and what he saw was enough to freeze him with horror. A frightful silence reigned over all. The image of death was everywhere, and there was nothing to be seen but what seemed to be the outstretched bodies of dead men and animals. He, however, very well knew, by the ruby faces and pimpled noses of the porters, that they were only asleep, and their goblets, wherein still remained some drops of wine, showed plainly that they had fallen asleep while drinking their wine. He then crossed a court paved with marble, went up the stairs, and came into the guard chamber, where guards were standing in their ranks, with their muskets upon their shoulders, and snoring with all their might. He went through several rooms full of gentlemen and ladies, some standing and others sitting, but all were asleep. He came to a gilded chamber, where he saw upon a bed, the curtains of which were all open, the most beautiful sight ever beheld, a princess who appeared to be about 15 or 16 years of age, and whose bright and resplendent beauty had something divine in it. He approached trembling and with admiration, and fell down upon his knees before her. Then, as the end of the enchantment was come, the princess awoke, and looking on him with eyes more tender than could have been expected at first sight, said, "Is it you, my prince? You have waited a long while." The prince, charmed with these words, and much more with the manner in which they were spoken, knew not how to show his joy and gratitude. He assured her that he loved her better than he did himself. Their discourse was not very connected, but they were the better pleased, for where there is much love, there is little eloquence. Is he saying that they were just not talking? I don't know. He was more at a loss than she, and we need not wonder at it, She had had time to think of what to say to him, for it is evident, though history says nothing of it, that the good fairy, during so long a sleep, had given her very pleasant dreams. In short, they talked together for hours, and then they said not half they had to say. In the meanwhile, all the palace had woke up with the princess. Every one thought upon his own business, and as they were not in love, they were ready to die of hunger. The lady of honor, being as sharp-set as of the other folks, grew very impatient and told the princess aloud that the meal was served. The prince helped the princess to rise. She was entirely and very magnificently dressed, but his royal highness took care not to tell her that she was dressed like his great-grandmother. Good point. And had a high collar. She looked not a bit the less charming and beautiful for all that. Fair. It's a real thing that would have to be dealt with. They went into the great mirrored hall, where they supped, and were served by the officers of the princess's household. The violins and hautboys played old tunes, but they were excellent, though they had not been played for 100 years, and after supper, without losing any time, the Lord Almoner married them in the chapel of the castle. They had but very little sleep. The princess scarcely needed any, and the prince left her next morning to return to the city, where his father was greatly troubled about him. The prince told him that he lost his way in the forest as he was hunting, that he had slept in the cottage of a charcoal burner who gave him cheese and brown bread. Why you gotta lie like that, dude? The king, his father, who was a good man, believed him, but his mother could not be persuaded that this was true, and seeing that he went almost every day a-hunting, that he always had some excuse ready for doing so, though he had been out 3 or 4 nights together, she began to suspect that he was married, for he lived thus with the princess above 2 whole years, during which they had 2 children. The elder daughter was named Dawn, and the younger son they called Day, because he was a great deal handsomer than his sister. Okay, that's rude. But okay, he lived for 2 years, going back and forth between home, where he lied, and to his princess, where maybe he's telling the truth to her, maybe not. Okay. The queen spoke several times to her son to learn after what manner he was passing his time, and told him that in this he ought in duty to satisfy her, but he never dared to trust her with his secret. He feared her, though he loved her, for she was the race of the ogres, and the king married her for her vast riches alone. It was even whispered about the court that she had ogrish inclinations, and that whenever she saw little children passing by, she had all the difficulty in the world to prevent herself from falling upon them, and so the prince would never tell her one word. Oh, okay, makes sense. Sorry, sir, you were right. Okay. But when the king was dead, which happened about 2 years afterward, and he saw himself lord and master, he openly declared his marriage, and he went in great state to conduct his queen to the palace. They made a magnificent entry into the capital city, she riding between her 2 children. There's still so much story to go. I don't think this will end terribly well. We'll see. Soon after, the king made war on Emperor Cantalabut, his neighbor. Okay. He left the government of the kingdom to the queen, his mother, and earnestly commended his wife and children to her care. He was obliged to carry on the wall all the summer, and as soon as he left, the queen mother sent her daughter-in-law and her children to a country house among the woods, that she might with the more ease gratify her horrible longing. Some few days afterwards she went thither herself and said to her head cook, "I intend to eat little Dawn for my dinner tomorrow." "Damn it, Mom." "Oh, madam," cried the head cook. "I will have it so," replied the queen, and this she spoke in the tone of an ogress who had a strong desire to eat fresh meat, "and will eat her with a sharp sauce." The poor man, the cook, knowing very well that he must not play tricks with ogresses, took his great knife and went up into little Dawn's chamber. She was then nearly 4 years old, and came up to him, jumping and laughing, to put her arms around his neck, and asked him for some sugar candy, upon which he began to weep. The great knife fell out of his hand, and he went into the backyard and killed a little lamb, and dressed it with such good sauce that his mistress assured him she had never eaten anything so good in her life. He had at the same time taken up little Dawn and carried her to his wife to conceal her in his lodging at the end of the courtyard. 8 days afterwards, the wicked queen said to the cook, "I will sup upon little Day." He answered not a word, being resolved to cheat her again, as he had done before. He went to find little Day and saw him with a foil in his hand, with which he was fencing a great monkey. Oh. The child was then only 3 years of age. He took him up in his arms and carried him to his wife, that she might conceal him in her chamber along with his sister, and instead of little Day he served up a very young and tender kid, aka goat, which the ogress found to be wonderfully good. All had gone well up to now, but one evening this wicked queen said to her chef cook, "I will eat the queen with the same sauce I had with her children." So ogress queen wants to eat Sleeping Beauty. Now the poor chef cook was in despair and could not imagine how to deceive her again. The young queen was over 20 years old, not reckoning the 100 years she had been asleep, and how to find something to take her place greatly puzzled him. He then decided to save his own life, to cut the queen's throat, and going up into her chamber, with the intent to do it at once, he put himself into as great fury as he possibly could, and came into the queen's room with his dagger in hand. He would not, however, deceive her, but told her with a great deal of respect the orders he had received from the queen mother. Do it, she said, stretching out her neck. "Carry on your orders, and then I shall go and see my children, my poor children whom I loved so much and so tenderly," for she thought them dead, since they had been taken away without her knowledge. "No, no, madam," cried the poor chef cook, all in tears. "You shall not die, and you shall see your children again at once, but then you must go home with me to my lodgings, where I have concealed them, and I will deceive the queen once more by giving her a young hind in your stead." Upon this he forthwith conducted her to his room, where, leaving her to embrace her children and cry along with them, he went and dressed a young hind. I'm not sure what a hind is. What is a hind? I feel like this is a good thing to think. I will Google. What animal is a hind? It is a deer. It is a red deer, with which the queen had for her supper. And so he dressed a young deer the queen had for supper, and devoured with as much appetite as if it had been the young queen. She was now well satisfied with her cruel deeds, and she invented a story to tell the king on his return, of how the queen, his wife, and her 2 children had been devoured by mad wolves. One evening, as she was, according to her custom, rambling about the courts and yards of the palace to see if she could smell any fresh meat, she heard in a room on the ground floor little Day crying for his mamma. For his mamma was going to whip him because he had been naughty, and she heard at the same time little Dawn begging mercy for her brother. The ogress knew the voice of the queen and her children at once, and being furious at having been thus deceived, she gave orders in a most horrible voice, which made everybody tremble, that next morning by break of day they should bring into the middle of the great court a large tub filled with toads, vipers, snakes, and all sorts of serpents, in order to have the queen and her children, the chef cook, his wife and maid, all thrown into it, all of whom were to be brought thither with their hands tied behind them. They were brought out accordingly, and the executioners were just going to throw them into the tub when the king, who was not so soon expected, entered the court on horseback, and asked, with the utmost astonishment, as he should, what was the meaning of that horrible spectacle. No one dared to tell him, when the ogress, all enraged to see what had happened, threw herself head foremost into the tub, and was instantly devoured by the ugly creatures she had ordered to be thrown into it to kill the others. The king was of course very sorry, for she was his mother, but he soon comforted himself with his beautiful wife and his pretty children. The end. And what an insane story that was as well. It seemed it went all kinds of directions, but it ended nicely enough. Strangely, I've been seeing lots of these. One person in a marriage is an ogre and awful and eats children, but the other person is nice and maybe not an ogre? I don't know. Because if the prince is still nice and the king before him was nice, being half ogre, the prince was not so bad, or was the ogress a stepmother? It's unclear. Anyway. I have one more story that I think I will read tonight, and that is Riquet with the Tuft. And I have no idea what this is. The first sentence, though, implies that there's a queen who has a very, 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 very ugly son. Cool. I think I would like to read straight through. Just take a minute to hydrate. Because I would like to end a bit early tonight, get some sleep. I have some business to do tomorrow, and I would like to be well rested. So I'm sorry for the shorter stream, but we will read this story, and if you have trigger requests after it, I will do those, and then we will go to bed. Thank you, Death Noah. Okay, it is not Sleeping Beauty in the Woods. It is Riquet with a Tuft. Whatever that should mean. Right. Once upon a time, there was a queen who had a son so ugly and so misshapen that it was long disputed whether he had human form. Like I said, very, 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 very ugly. A fairy who was at his birth said, however, that he would be very amiable after all that, since he would have uncommon good sense. She even added that it would be in his power, by virtue of a gift she had just given then to him, to bestow as much sense as he pleased on the person he loved the best. All this somewhat comforted the poor queen. It is true that this child no sooner began to talk than he said 1,000 pretty things, and in all his actions there was an intelligence that was quite charming. I forgot to tell you that he was born with a little tuft of hair upon his head, which made them call him Riquet with the Tuft, for Riquet was the family name. They actually have a little footnote that Riquet bracket 1 bracket, but no explanation. Anyway. 7 or 8 years later, the queen of a neighboring kingdom had 2 daughters who were twins. The firstborn of these was more beautiful than the day, whereas the queen was so very glad that those present were were afraid that her excess of joy would do her harm. The same fairy who was present at the birth of little Riquet with the Tuft was here also, and, to moderate the queen's gladness, she declared that the little princess should have no sense at all, but should be as stupid as she was pretty. This mortified the queen extremely, but afterwards she had a far greater sorrow, for the second daughter proved to be very ugly. Do not afflict yourself so much, madam. Your daughter shall have her recompense. She shall have so great a portion of sense that the want of beauty will be hardly perceived. God grant it, replied the queen. There is no way to make the eldest, who is pretty, have any sense? I can do nothing for her, madam, as to sense, answered the fairy, but everything as to beauty. And as there is nothing I would not do for your satisfaction, I give her the gift that she shall have the power to make handsome the person who shall best please her. We can see where this is going. As these princesses grew up, their perfections grew with them. All the public talk was of the beauty of the elder and the rare good sense of the younger. It is true also that their deficits increased considerably with their age. The younger grew visibly uglier and uglier. The elder became every day more and more stupid. She either had no answer at all to what was asked her, or said something very silly. She was with all this so unhandy that she could not place 4 pieces of china upon the mantelpiece without breaking one of them, nor drink a glass of water without spilling half of it upon her clothes. Although beauty is a very great advantage in young people, the younger sister was always the more preferred in society. People would indeed go first to the beauty to look upon and admire her, but turn aside soon after to the wit to hear 1,000 most entertaining and agreeable things, and it was amazing to see, in less than a quarter of an hour's time, the elder with not a soul near her, and the whole company crowding about the younger. The elder, dull as she was, could not fail to notice this, and without the slightest regret would have given all her beauty to have half her sister's wit. The queen, prudent as she was, could not help reproaching her several times for her stupidity, which almost made the poor princess die of grief. One day, as she had hidden herself in a wood to bewail her misfortune, she saw coming to her a very disagreeable little man, but most magnificently dressed. This was the young Prince Riquet with the Tuft, who, having fallen in love with her upon seeing her picture, many of which were distributed the world over, had left his father's kingdom to have the pleasure of seeing and talking with her. Overjoyed to find her thus alone, he addressed himself to her with all imaginable politeness and respect. Having observed her, as he had paid her the ordinary compliments, that she was extremely melancholy, he said to her, I cannot comprehend, madam, how a person so beautiful as you are can be so sorrowful as you seem to be. For though I can boast of having seen a great number of exquisitely charming ladies, I can say that I never beheld anyone whose beauty approaches yours. You are pleased to say so, answered the princess, and here she stopped. Beauty, replied Riquet with the Tuft, is such a great advantage that it ought to take place of all the things besides, and since you possess this treasure, I can see nothing that can possibly very much afflict you. I had far rather, cried the princess, be as ugly as you are, and have sense, than have the beauty I possess, and be as stupid as I am. There is nothing, madam, returned he, shows more that we have good sense than to believe we have none, and it is the nature of that excellent quality that the more people have of it, the more they believe they want it. I do not know that, says the princess, but I know very well that I am very senseless, and that vexes me mightily. If that be all which troubles you, madam, I can very easily put an end to your affliction. And how will you do that? Cried the princess. I have the power, madam, replied Riquet with the Tuft, to give to that person who I love best as much good sense as can be had, and as you, madam, are that very person, it will be your fault only if you have not as great a share of it as any one living thing, provided you will be pleased to marry me." The princess was quite confused and answered not a word. "I see," replied Riquet with the Tuft, that this proposal does not please you, and I do not wonder at it, but I will give you a whole year to consider it." The princess had so little sense, and at the same time so great a longing to have some, that she imagined the end of that year would never come, so she accepted the proposal which was made to her. She had no sooner promised Riquet with the Tuft that she would marry him on that day 12-month, than she found herself quite otherwise than she was before. She had an incredible faculty of speaking whatever she had in her mind in a polite, easy, and natural manner. She began that moment a very gallant conversation with Riquet with the Tuft, which she kept up at such a rate that Riquet with the Tuft believed he had given her more sense than he had reserved for himself. When she returned to the palace, the whole court knew not what to think of such a sudden and extraordinary change, for they had heard from her now as much sensible discourse, and as many infinitely witty phrases as they had heard stupid and silly impertinences before. The whole court was overjoyed beyond imagination at it. It pleased all but her younger sister, because, having no longer the advantage of her in respect to wit, she appeared in comparison with her very disagreeable, homely girl. The king governed himself by her advice, and would even sometimes hold a council in her apartment. The news of this change in the princess spread everywhere. The young princes of the neighboring kingdoms strove all they could to gain her favor, and almost all of them asked her in marriage, but she found not one of them had sense enough for her. She gave them all a hearing, but would not engage herself to any. Well, wasn't she kind of already engaged? Anyway. However, they came one so powerful, so rich, so witty, and so handsome that she could not help feeling a strong inclination toward him. Her father perceived it, and told her that she was her own mistress as to the choice of a husband, and that she might declare her intentions. She thanked her father, and desired him to give her time to consider it. She went by chance to walk in the same wood where she met with Riquet with the Tuft, the more conveniently to think what she ought to do. While she was walking in a profound meditation, she heard a confused noise under her feet, as if it were a great many people busily running around backward and forward. Listening more attentively, she heard one say, "Bring me that pot," another, "Give me that kettle," and a third, "Put some wood upon the fire." The ground at the same time opened, and she saw under her feet a great kitchen full of cooks, kitchen helps, and all sorts of officers necessary for magnificent entertainment. There came out of it a company of cooks, to the number of 20 or 30, who went to plant themselves about a very long table set up in the forest, with their larding pins in their hands and foxtails in their caps, and began to work, keeping time to a very harmonious tune. The princess, all astonished at this sight, asked them for whom they worked. "For Prince Riquet with the Tuft," said the chief of them, "who is to be married tomorrow." The princess, more surprised than ever, and recollecting all at once that it was now that day 12-month on which she had promised to marry the Prince Riquet with the Tuft, was ready to sink into the ground. What made her forget this was that when she made this promise she was very silly, and having obtained that vast stock of sense which the prince had bestowed upon her, she had entirely forgotten the things she had done in the days of her stupidity. She continued her walk, but had not taken 30 steps before Riquet with the Tuft presented himself to her, gallant and most magnificently dressed, like a prince who was going to be married. "You see, madam," said he, "I am exact in keeping my word, and doubt not in the least but you are come hither to perform your promise." "I frankly confess," answered the princess, "that I have not yet come to a decision in this matter, and I believe I shall be able to arrive at such a one, and I believe I never shall be able to arrive at such a one as you desire." "You astonish me, madam," said Riquet with the Tuft. "I can well believe it," said the princess, "and surely, if I had to do with a clown or a man of no sense, I should find myself very much at a loss. A princess always keeps her word, he would say to me, and you must marry me since you promised to do so. But as he to whom I talk is the one man in the world who is master of greatest sense and judgment, I am sure he will hear reason. You know that when I was but a fool I could scarcely make up my mind to marry you. Why will you have me, now that I have so much judgment as you gave me, come to such a decision, which I could not then make up my mind to agree to? If you scarcely thought to make me your wife, you have been greatly in the wrong to deprive me of my dull simplicity and make me see things much more clearly than I did. I am a man of wit and of no wit and sense, replied Riquet with a tut. Oh no. One more retry. If a man of no wit and sense, replied Riquet with a tuft, would be well received, as you say, in reproaching you for your breach of your word, why will you not let me, madam, have the same usage in a manner wherein all the happiness of my life is concerned? It is reasonable that persons of wit and sense should be in a worse condition than those who have none? Can you pretend this, you who have so great a share, and desired so earnestly to have it? But let us come to the fact, if you please. Putting aside my ugliness and deformity, is there anything in me which displeased you? Are you dissatisfied with my birth, my wit, my humor, or my manners? Not at all, answered the princess. I love you and respect you in all that attention. If it be so, said Riquet with the tuft, I am happy, since it is in your power to make me the most amiable of men. How can that be? Said the princess. It is done, said Riquet with the tuft, if you love me enough to wish it so, and that you may no ways doubt, madam, of what I say. Know that the same fairy who on my birthday gave me for gift the power of making the person who should please me witty and judicious, has in like manner given you the gift, the power of making whom you love, and to whom you would want to grant the favor, to be extremely handsome. If it be so, said the princess, I wish with all my heart that you may be the most lovable prince in the world, and I bestow my gift on you as much as I am able. The princess had no sooner pronounced these words than Riquet with the tuft appeared to her the finest prince upon earth, the handsomest and most amiable man she ever saw. Some affirm that it was not the fairy's charms, but love alone, which worked the change. They say that the princess, having made due reflection on the perseverance of her lover, his discretion, and all the good qualities of his mind, his wit and judgment, so saw no longer the deformity of his body, nor the ugliness of his face, that his hump seemed to her no more than the grand air of one having a broad back, and that whereas till then she saw him limp horribly, she now found it nothing more than a certain sliding air which charmed her. They say further that his eyes, which were squinted very much, seemed to her most bright and sparkling, that their irregularity passed in her judgment for a mark of the warmth of his affection, and, in short, that his great red nose was, in her opinion, somewhat martial and heroic in character. However, it was the princess promised immediately to marry him, on condition that he obtained the king's consent. The king, knowing that his daughter highly esteemed Riquet with the tuft, whom he knew also for a most sage and judicious prince, received him for his son-in-law with pleasure, and the next morning their nuptials were celebrated, as Riquet with the tuft had foreseen, and according to the orders he had given a long time before. The end. My plot hole with that is, why did the sister have to be ugly but with a lot of sense, and then not given any gift herself? She just got to be liked until people saw the other one. I don't know what's going on. But alright, that was the end of that one as well. Oh, hello. Welcome back. I'm glad that you have joined, but I was actually about to leave. Well, I wanted to leave at 1. I still have 15 minutes. I am looking to go to bed sooner, but let's see if I can find one of the similarly short stories. Because if I find one that is short enough, then I'll read that. I'll stick around for that. I said I would leave at 1. Maybe that is a little long. I have never done raiding. I'm not entirely sure what I would do. Let me see something. No, that is not what I want to check. This is. Aha! I will send the few of you that are with me off back to Violet. Ha 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 ha! I done it. Let's go. Aw, no, I'm not allowed to. It said I'm not allowed to raid them. What in the heck? Yeah, I'm not sure how. It just says we are unable to raid Violet at this time, so I can't go there. And when I tried to do that, it didn't let me. So I'm not sure where that would go. She might have raids off. I imagine she's preparing to leave tonight too, and she said she would be raiding someone else. But I can tell you guys to go visit her. Go there. If you want to. And I will save the next stories for another day. But thank you. Was that one? And then Riquet. But thank you for coming back. I am back tomorrow. Yes. I'm back tomorrow evening for sure. So I'll be here. I canceled my earlier stream for the other things I have to do tomorrow, and that's why I'm trying to go to bed. But you'll get it. You'll be here when you can spend more time soon enough, I'm sure. Thank you for being here, and thank you, Death Noah, for giving me this subscription so that I can have the little Psyducks. I really appreciate. And everybody, sleep well, good night, and I hope I see you in the chat tomorrow. Alright, thank you, bye-bye.